Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 11th day of April in the year of our Lord 2025. It's difficult to leave the subject of war and talk about tariffs, but I've been waiting for the wars to pause just long enough for me to do it. The wars haven't cooperated, but I have to pause them for this week since the subject of tariffs can no longer be ignored. I don't claim to be an economist, but I do know something about economic history, so I will therefore endeavor to give my opinion, on the subject of tariffs and what they mean for us. I used to study the marketing theory of one of the great marketers in the world, and that was Dan Kennedy. People would pay handsomely for Dan's advice. They would often ask him, "So, what should I do, this or that?" And his answer was always yes. In other words, he would advise them to implement all those ideas at the same time. President Trump seems to have adopted that shotgun approach to how he deals with the U.S. economy and its relationship with the world. The tariff seems to be the base of Trump's economic program. He has announced the implementation of 10% baseline tariffs on all imports, but he has now temporarily paused those tariffs for 90 days. My understanding is that all reciprocal tariffs are paused except China, which stands now at 125%. He said that, quote, yippee globalist and queasy skeptics fueled his decision. I guess that means people were getting nervous, and that made him nervous. Tariffs are a tax on the importers of goods, and the people who buy the finished products from the imported goods ultimately pay the tax. True, the buyer's free to not buy, but in any event, the tax money goes to the government. That explains the idea that tariffs will help reduce the deficit and therefore debt. The problem is that if we think about it, the flaw in that reasoning is that increased revenue comes at the cost of decreased production, thus offsetting any gains. Tariffs tend to slow down production wherever they are imposed. That is a concept proven time and again by history. The Chinese are a little uppity right now about these tariffs, so their 125% tariff stays in place, no pause for them. The UN tells us that China now has 31% of world manufacturing. That is expected to increase to 45% by 2030. The idea then is to spur U.S. manufacturing. That's a good thing, but only if people have enough income to afford the products made by that manufacturing. Trump asserts that this tariff will correct decades of unfair trade practices that have disadvantaged American workers and industries. Quote from the president, quote, "For too long, other nations have taken advantage of our open markets while imposing barriers to our products. Those days are over," end quote. Think about it like this. A banana republic sells bananas to the U.S. We sell them cars in return. We import twice as many bananas as that country does cars. So there's a trade deficit. We put a 100% tariff on bananas, so the problem is solved. The difficulty is that the banana republic now can't afford nearly as many cars, so it's self-defeating. What he is attacking and threatening then is the order of the world that has existed since the end of World War II. It's a globalist order in which the United States controls the world's access to money with its reserve currency status, while foreigners make stuff and exchange that stuff for U.S. debt and a promise to make interest payments on that debt. The economic world order alters or changes from time to time, as it did with the end of the gold standard in 1971. Things seemed to work well until the first really expensive war collided with the civil rights movement, in which millions of additional Americans had to be included in the social fabric of Americans. Welfare is politics. President Johnson talked from time to time about how difficult it was to pay for both wars and civil rights at the same time. His biography has many references to the predicament that he was in. President Nixon found it impossible to do both, and the triple blow was the promise of redeeming dollars with gold. His answer was to take the U.S. off the gold standard, thus reneging on that promise. Suddenly, the dollar was free, almost literally free, with no restraints, which allowed the nation's politicians to spend without limit. The debt grew and grew along with the deficits each year until now. It is estimated that this fiscal year's interest payment will be approximately $1.2 trillion. That's just for interest, folks. The U.S. paid a price for being chosen to lead the world and impose our will on it, i.e., you do what we say, or we are going to war. That means invasion and regime change. To stay leader in that game, the U.S. had to assume a role of uncontrolled military spending, and to justify that, the masses had to be pacified. The U.S. lost its way somewhere along that road. I think Trump's trying to find his way back. He might use a meat cleaver when a scalpel would work just fine, but I still think that's what he intends. If you read his book, The Art of the Deal, you can clearly see the tactics. The rise of the computerized world powered by the internet brought the world together and allowed the oligarchs of the various nations to work together to accomplish globalization. The whole world was globalized, interconnected. U.S. manufacturing was offshored, meaning our capacity to make things went to foreign workers because U.S. workers, well, just too expensive. Gradually, the middle-class jobs disappeared. All those factory jobs had to be replaced with something else. Well, do you know what the most common job in America is today, folks? It's retail sales. Those people who once worked in a steel mill, as their fathers had done before them, are now working at Walmart, carrying bags in hotels, selling shoes. Their pay reduced from factory wages, which included benefits and retirement, to minimum wage. And the reality of constantly moving from job to job, people would be living in abject poverty except for the easy availability of credit because nobody could live on their own income. This was a never-ending cycle because the easy credit, which meant unlimited fuel for the economy, drove prices up, made it even harder. Final result for each formerly middle-class American family was unpayable debt and bankruptcy. Then the cycle would start all over. Will tariffs bring back American manufacturing, reopen our shuttered Rust Belt factories? I sure hope they do, folks. Globalization, as the president sees it then, is other nations taking advantage of America, stealing America's wealth. But the reality is this. Foreigners shipped us cars, clothing, electronic gadgets, medicine, so on and so forth. The U.S. shipped them debt securities, blips on computer screens, and a promise that those blips could buy things. In other words, they made our goods, we gave them IOUs as debt, which was a burden borne by the hardworking American taxpayer and their children. America lost its status as the world's largest exporter. Instead, it exported mostly debt. That debt has to be paid eventually by someone. That eventually is fast approaching. Some of the things we import in great numbers are vital to the American people. The product I'm thinking of is antibiotics, which almost exclusively now made in China. The other things which are vital to the nation are not as vital as each person being able to cure an infection in his body. Things such as computer chips, the all-important rare earth minerals without which the electronic gadgets could not work. Perhaps that's why Trump is trying so hard to secure Ukraine's rare earth deposits for the U.S. China's economy is more dependent on the U.S. than the U.S. economy is dependent on China, but that doesn't mean China will go away peacefully. One tactic they have is selling U.S. treasuries, thus making them worth less, driving up the cost of refinancing the roughly $9 trillion of debt which must be refinanced very soon. China has also been able to reduce its total exports to the U.S. to around 15%. It managed to do that by transshipping goods through Vietnam, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian countries. That's probably why the Trump team told the Vietnamese that even reducing their tariff to zero would not be enough. The reciprocal tariff for Vietnam was 46% before the pause. I have a list here right in front of me of every country in the world and the proposed tariffs for that country. Only the big trading partners are being heavily taxed. The vast majority of countries are 10%. Even most of Europe is 10%, but the Europeans are the enraged ones, second only to China. I suspect the real reason for the Chinese uncompromising attitude is that to just accept an equitable tariff with the U.S. with all this publicity around it would be an admission that the world order still puts them second. They're not going to accept that. They're not going to be willing to admit that to the world. The Europeans, on the other hand, just want things to continue where Uncle Sam pays for it all. The Europeans talk about war and bluster with paranoia regarding Russia, but they expect the U.S. to pay for it. The American people have made it clear they want an end to these wars and that they can't see any U.S. purpose in fighting them. The administration said that some 70 countries have contacted U.S. trade officials to negotiate reduced tariffs, and most have offered to reduce their tariffs on American goods to zero. Would reducing tariffs worldwide to zero be a good thing for everybody? I'm not sure if it would or not, because it seems to me that it would further degrade U.S. manufacturing, thus driving down wages even further. But zero tariffs are apparently not Mr. Trump's intent. Would zero tariffs make for a more peaceful world? Maybe so, and if so, perhaps it would be worth it. I'm not sure how sustainable the U.S. economy can be when it is based almost entirely on buying things that others make in exchange for ever-increasing debt. Trump also used the tariffs as a weapon to intimidate other countries into doing what he demanded they do. He used high tariffs against certain countries in Latin America, South America, to force them to repatriate their criminals, which he wanted deported from the United States. That tactic worked against small, weak countries, but I doubt if it would work against more powerful countries like China. Finally, folks, if resetting the world order economically can be accomplished by tariffs to make the world a more peaceful place to live, work, raise our families, that would be a good thing. I hope and pray that it is so in the future. At least that's the way I see it. Until next time, folks, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.